Ladies and gentlemen, please be upstanding to the President of Ireland, Michael D. Higgins.
Cohilig is ære cohilig den coile de colle kunde se ierne usla fates honor anamortem hen ven shan land cri I gri lar slette kilomanton is tama harve fuiti fasamt un kirit tjukt agus couple faklaro an overtover sham. Dear friends, it is an honor for me to be here today in Glencree and the heart of the hills of Wicklow, and I do want to thank William Devers, Glenrose staff and their board for their invitation to speak today. It is fitting that we should come together in Glencree to consider the challenge of how we should reflect on the legacy of 1916. The title of what I was invited to speak today is indeed 1916 and the Ethics of Memory. For 40 years, as you have heard, the Glencree Centre for Peace and Reconciliation has provided a space for dialogue and opportunities for people from across this island, across the religious and political spectrum, to come together and quite simply talk, and even more importantly, listen to each other and at times come to understand a previously opposing and challenging perspective.
Well, I thought today has been a very enlightening time for, the peace movement and everything, and going forward with the 1916 and the commemorations. And I felt that our President, Mr. Higgins, spoke extremely well, and it was actually a very, very encouraging words from him going forward in the future.
The work of Glencree has been grounded in an unswerving determination to serve the cause of peace. Shiacon. I'm delighted to have been invited here today as patron of Glencree. The term of my presidency, which began on the 11th of the 11th, 2011, coincides with what has been described or referred to as the decade of commemorations. Beginning with the lockout of 1913, responding to anniversaries such as the beginning of the First World War, the founding of Cumann na mBan, the death of O'Donovan Rossa, the sinking of the Lusitania, the military campaign of Gallipoli. I've had many opportunities over the past 3.5 years to reflect and speak on the theme of memory. It is, I think, in imagining a future released from the burdens of distorted past memories and seemingly insurmountable present difficulties, that we need a special energy for constructing what might be an empowering ethics of memory.
I think it's interesting and provocative, the questions it asks. For somebody like me who was at school in 1966 when we had the 50th commemoration, it's really striking what a different debate we're having now. One of the difficult issues is that balance between celebration and commemoration.
All societies emerging out of conflict wrestle with the legacy of the past and how to address it. They must consider not only what is consciously recalled by an individual act of memory, sourced as it is in social setting, but what is unconsciously transmitted, often through uncritically accepted versions of the past, and for which the status of culture is often claimed, even belief. What to remember and how to remember carries the inescapable implication of an ethical consideration. It is important that any approach to dealing with the past recognizes too the complex relationship that exists, I suggest, between memory, ethics and forgiveness.
I'm fascinated by the whole subject. My name is Martin Levy and I'm from the Dublin Quaker Peace Committee, and we're grappling with this topic of remembering significant events from 1914 right up to 1923. And as you may be aware, Friends have a very strong peace testimony. But interestingly, over that period, Friends actually debated themselves from a pacifist to an involvement, and there's the whole struggle there. And this debate that is going on resonates with that, so you can have a very strong Christian pacifist position, but actually the reality of trying to work it out is not as easy as all that.
Remembering Easter 1916 in an ethical manner poses challenges for all of us, as individuals, as communities, and indeed as a state. And how we mark in our public commemorations this important moment on our road to independence, or recalling the dead, and how we honour those who died fighting in these causes appropriately and inclusively will be a test for us. How can we remember in such a way as releases us from past wrongs, leaving us free from the crystallised versions of hurt, recrimination and revenge? For these are difficult questions, but fundamental questions, and we have to approach them in a spirit of openness, using the process of public commemoration which has now commenced to emancipate us and empower us and others in our contemporary condition.
Well, I'm very pleased about today's event. I think the President gave a most thoughtful analysis of the difficulties, the challenges we're going to face in remembering 1916, the rebellion and the Somme. That was a great foundation, and the ideas are very stimulating. The difficulty about memory, the frailty of memory, the people who have been forgotten about completely, the voices that were never heard in these times, and then the people who died in 1916 on various sides. So I thought it was a great day.
For too long our understanding of 1916 and the surrounding period was hindered by an assumption that we can more easily make sense of events, and indeed our own sense of individual and national identity, if we keep our historical narratives simple and homogeneous. Complex events demand a consideration that respects that complexity, that seeks to unravel it rather than impose upon it, or invest it with a simplicity that leads away from knowledge, and even by doing so to facilitate ideological manipulation. We can now perceive more clearly the catastrophic impact that the first of two global wars in the 20th century had on our own island and on Irish attitudes and allegiances. But for so long, however, commemorating or even allowing the memory of the First World War did not seem to fit into the mainstream narrative of Ireland's path to independence, or was largely left to become the preserve of the Unionist community or those from a Protestant background. And when we seek to recall not only the Rising, but also the Somme, we are required to ask from what conditions did the participants come. For many, it was poverty rather than faith or beliefs, or indeed pursuit of a heroic that led to activism. For many it was poverty rather than faith that drove some to rebel against the British state, and yet others, many more, to fight on its behalf in the trenches of Flanders. The sharing of moments of grief, even then at a distance, allows us to remember both the Somme and the Easter Rising, these two similar events and many more of 1916, in a manner of mutual respect that can deepen reconciliation rather than seeking to further perpetuate conflicting versions of what might be, for whatever purposes, different identities. So this work of commemorating should invigorate rather than discourage us. It is in imagining a future released from the burdens of distorted past memories. I often think of Eugene O'Neill, where memory is used as that great instrument for flogging. And when also we need to get past, sometimes, the seemingly insurmountable present difficulties, falsely presented to us as inevitable. And there we find the energy for constructing what might be not only an ethics of memory, but an ethics of life. And it is only through acts of imagination and creativity that we can prevent forms of tragic memory from, as I have already put it, colonising the future.
Today's event is it's for me it's the whole thing about remembrance and remembering, and I will be coming to Glencree quite often in relation to the conflict in the north and the whole thing about closure and the legacy issue. So for me, the whole thing about remembrance and the issues about remembrance and how it's dealt with are very important.
So for those of you who don't know me, I'm William DeVast, the CEO of Glencree, and I'm absolutely delighted to see you all here today. My attempt at a Cúpla Focal earlier on, and my deliberate attempt to quote one of my heads of state, Queen Elizabeth, was deliberate to stress the fact that it's something important to me. The two places I call home, Britain and Ireland, are now friendly.
We saw a great deal of effectively nihilism between the wars, logical positivism, fascism, communism, both growing out of that. What did we do post-World War II? We said, well, now we'll have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the European Convention. It's a partial answer. It's a very selective answer, because you're saying we'll only have those duties that are mandated by somebody having a right, and we lose a whole layer of the ethical vocabulary and tradition of Europe, of Christianity, of other faiths, because we lose what were classically called the imperfect duties: generosity, benevolence, forgiveness, mercy, all sorts of things that are not matters of human rights.
Well, taking Honora's warning about another beast which may be slouching towards Bethlehem to be born, is there a danger, do you think, in not remembering?
I think there are huge dangers in not remembering. Forgetting, amnesia, is a way of living in delusion, I think. Not only refusing to learn lessons from the past, but to run the risk of repeating that past. And I think the 20th century is a century when we do need to reflect very deeply on what happened. It was the collapse of a world order. It was the collapse of, I think, Christendom as well. It was the collapse of many things. But have we really learned the lessons, or are we simply repeating in other ways some of the catastrophe and the sleepwalking, for example, that led up to World War I?
It's very interesting to try to reflect on 1916 and how to commemorate that. There's a terrific lineup. I think particularly Johnston McMaster and Honora O'Neill have been very provocative and stimulating in their comments. Of course, the President Higgins, is always good value.
Finally, Elizabeth Young Brule, in her consideration of Hannah Arendt's work and evolution of her thinking on forgiveness, refers to how Arendt wrestled with the problem of the relationship between the forgiver and the forgiven. The claiming of the status of the forgiver had problems, as it has internationally. Again, agency and the issue as to whether forgiveness had to be sought had to be considered. Then, too, there was the issue of self-forgiveness. Again, too, Marie-Louise Nott put it well, speaking of Ricoeur. Ricoeur sees it as the historian's task to salvage possibilities for action that have been forgotten and to liberate the unkept promises of the past from the ruins of history. I think when I spoke last Windsor Castle last April, I said we owe duty to all those who lost their lives, the duty to build together in peace. It is the only restitution, the only enduring justice that we can offer them. Engaging with the past is not easy. It involves a complex negotiation of the manifold stories, memories, hearts, legacies, emotions of all who recall 1960, or were or are still affected by the Troubles, and finding a fair and comprehensive way of dealing with the past, one that will win the confidence of all, is a huge challenge. But it's one that not only should not be shirked, but it is one that can be conquered. In facing up to that challenge, let us at least ensure that our approach is characterised by a will to remember ethically, to view forgiveness as a true release from the past, and to move forward to a new chapter, unburdened, the future released, not trammelled by any bitter memory of that past, free to make of our imagining an emancipatory, inclusive achievement in conditions of enduring peace. Garamila Mar.